This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about the pod autoscaler with respect to pod autoscaler. What is this HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler? And we were discussing how to scale your pods based on the observed metrics. We have done that, practically also we have explained. Is everyone able to practice whatever we already discussed? Okay, good. Now let's try to continue with the next set of topics. Now I want to deploy different applications. Let's say I want to deploy this application. I want to deploy this application. This application. This Spring Boot application. Now, if I want to run this application also in Kubernetes, do I need to containerize this application, which means do I need to have a container images created for that applications to deploy and manage in Kubernetes as a pod, as a container? Yes. So we already created an image. We already created an image as part of the, while discussing Docker itself, I've created an image. That image is already available in the registry. Now, can I deploy that Docker image of this application in Kubernetes cluster? Yes. Now, I already have this image. I already have that image. That image can be in any registry. That registry doesn't matter here. Whether it's in a Docker hub, whether it is in ECR, GCR, that doesn't matter here. Now I have that image in the Docker hub. Now I want to deploy that image. Now let's take this application, let's say this image. Now I have the lot of tags. Maybe I want to deploy this one. Now my image, this is my registry, my repository, and the tag is 1. I want to deploy this in Kubernetes. Now, can I directly create a container as we already discussed in Kubernetes? Can I directly create and manage a containers? No. We need to create a containers under pods. And again, is it directly recommended to create a pods in Kubernetes again? No. So then, can I go with some Kubernetes resources like a deployment, replica set, replication controller, whatever it is? So recommended way is what? It's not mandatory. Recommended way is deployment. Now, can I create a deployment for this application? Like this. Now, I'll try to create a deployment for that application. Now, API version, app/v1, deployment, metadata, name of the deployment. I will say something like this, Spring App deployment, or just a Spring App also fine. The labels, something like this, Spring App. Now, the match labels, here my pod labels, container. I can give some name, Spring App container. Image, can I use this image here? Now, when it comes to resources, there are two things which is important, which is recommended also, request and limits. So if I request more CPU, do you think will I get this pod get scheduled? Because in the current scenario, is this feasible in the current cluster? Because what is my capacity of what type of instances I have? What is the capacity of my worker nodes? What is the capacity of my worker node? T2.micro. So how much CPU? I'm saying I'm not asking number of worker nodes. I'm asking the capacity of worker node. So 1 GPU, 1 CPU, 1 GB, 1 CPU. Now, if I request like this, minimum 1 CPU, do you think my parts get scheduled? Do you think this part gets scheduled? No. Because do we already have some parts running? That parts also reserved some CPU and memory, your system related parts also. Your system related, kube system related. Do we already have a kube proxy pod running, VNet pod running? So those parts also reserved some CPU and memory. So do we have this much available in the current capacity? No. Your parts will not get scheduled. But in real time, are you going to have some kind of a high configuration servers, like each server maybe 64 core processor, 128 GB RAM, like that? Yes. Now, let me say CPU. I am requesting maybe just 200 millicore. Memory, I am requesting 256 MI. Limits. Limits, I can say memory, maybe 512 MI or even 1 GB also. This is a limit. Guys, even though I give 2 GB, is it going to throw kind of any error? Even though my system capacity is 1 GB, it is not going to throw any kind of a error. Limits, it is not going to verify. But is it going to verify the request, like whether the system has this much CPU memory available after calculating sum of all the resource requests of existing parts minus the capacity of the node? That formula will be there, but limits doesn't matter. For now, let me give limits also, something like this. Something like this. Now, what is my container port? 80, 80. Now, if you remember, this application is trying to communicate with another application. This is a stateless application. Is this stateless application is trying to communicate with another software like database, kind of a stateful software database, if you remember. So how we were passing those database details to this application code, how we were passing this database details like username, password, the host of the database, where exactly database is running. The developers, are they referring as a environment variables inside that code? They are referring as an environment variables inside the code. Now, when we are using Docker, when you are using Docker, how we are passing those environment variables at runtime, because you no need to have that defined in the Docker file. At runtime, you need to pass. So how we are passing at runtime? Was I using one option called -e in the Docker run command or Docker service command? Yes. If it is a compose file, did I use one field called environment? Environment in a compose file. Now this is Kubernetes manifest file. For this container also, is it possible for us to pass environment variables? Yes. What option? There is an option called env. There is an option called env, name, and value. Guys, I am using this IDE. It has some plugin, but I don't recommend this one. So you can start using typing manually env, name and value. What was the environment variable name they were expecting in the code? Let's see. The code somewhere they're referring. Kind of a this one. This is one environment variable. MongoDB host name. Now, can I pass IP address of my database server? Suppose my database is running in a virtual machine. I am not running my database as a container. I am not running database as a pod. I am running my application as a pod in Kubernetes cluster. Is it possible for me to have databases outside of Kubernetes cluster that can be in a managed database like RDS, or can it be a database running in some virtual machine. Is that possible? Is it mandatory to have databases also as a pods, as a containers? It's not mandatory as per your architecture. As per your architecture, suppose your database is sitting outside of your Kubernetes cluster. Your database is sitting outside of your Kubernetes cluster. Let's say this. Let me take this one. This is your Kubernetes cluster. This is your Kubernetes cluster. You have your application pods running here. You have your application pods running here. You have your application pods running here. Let's consider you deployed this application. This application is trying to communicate with the database. Any application. You are running that as a pod. You are running that as a pod. Is it mandatory to have your databases also running as a pods in that cluster? Your stateful applications, is it mandatory to have your database also running as a pod here? It's not mandate. It can run anywhere. Now let's consider, now your database is running in another virtual machine, in a virtualized environment. This is one VM. In this VM, you have installed Mongo that is running on 270.17, and this is the IP address of the database server. This is the IP address of the database server. Now, if I use this IP address and this port in this application, is it possible? Does this application can talk to this database? But make sure you need to have a network. Make sure you need to have a network between what? Your network between your Kubernetes servers and your database servers. Now let's say my Kubernetes nodes and my database servers also part of same VPC. By default, will they have a route? Will they have a route so that this can communicate with this one? Yes. Let's consider these databases are in a different VPC. Your Kubernetes cluster is in different VPC. Your Kubernetes nodes are in a different VPC, and your database is in a different VPC. Let's say this is different VPC. This is in a different VPC altogether. In that case, what concept I can use? It is nothing to do with Kubernetes. It is nothing to do with Kubernetes. So do I need to have a peering between the VPC of my Kubernetes cluster nodes and the VPC of my database server nodes, peering between those two networks? Then it will work. Then it will work. Otherwise, is it possible for me to go for RDS? I don't want to manage databases on my own. I want to go for a managed databases, database platforms, RDS. Then can I use that RDS endpoint also? Can I pass that RDS endpoint here? Whatever URL I'll get for that RDS. Yes. But again, network. If your RDS and your Kubernetes is in same VPC, fine. Otherwise, peering is required. It is nothing to do with Dockers, containers. Now, let's say your application demands you want your database also running as a container. You want that application team, that architect says you want to have the database also running as a container, not as a virtual machine. Then if I have a images available for databases, can I create a container? Can I create a container using that image? If it is a Kubernetes, do I need to create a pod? Do I need to create a pod for the database also? Yes. Now, if it is within Kubernetes cluster, it is not recommended to create a pod directly. Can I go with some controllers like deployment, replica set, replication controller? Yes. But in Kubernetes, there is one more Kubernetes resource called stateful set. So this is designed for deploying and managing what type of applications in Kubernetes? Managing stateful applications. Stateful applications. Stateful applications. So this deployment is recommended to use for what? It is recommended to use for what? It is recommended to use stateless applications. Stateless applications. It is recommended to use stateless application. If you want to run stateful applications like database, Jenkins, Nexus, or maybe like Kafka clusters, RabbitMQ clusters, it is recommended to go for a stateful set. This is recommended for stateful applications. But still, I will explain this stateful set later. But even though it's a stateful application, can I still use deployment and using volumes? Can I make it stateful? Can I still use deployment and using volumes with the deployments? Can I make it stateful? Yes. So I will explain this stateful set later. But for now, let's go with the deployment because you need to be familiar with volumes also. Now, I'll create this as a maybe replica set or deployment, whatever it is. Now, if I create a replica set or deployment for this stateful application, if this application has to communicate with this database pod, how it can communicate within the cluster? Do I need to use IP of this pod? Do I need to use IP of this node? If my database is also running inside the cluster, how can I communicate? If this application has to reach this application, then how can I communicate? Can I use service concept here? Service concept within the cluster? Can I create a service of type cluster IP? Because this is a database. I don't want to expose this database outside the cluster. Only database should be reachable within the cluster. Then can I create a service of type cluster IP? Then can I use that service name? Whatever service name I have used for this database, can I use that service name as a host here? Suppose I have given something like this, Mongo SVC, something like this, or just Mongo or Mongo SVC, something like this I have given. So can I use this as a host name? So this application part will it able to reach this database using that service name, but I need to make sure I have a service created with this name for database. Is everyone clear? If you understand the concept, things will be very simple, guys. Whether it is a real time, whether it's a sample application, if you understand the concepts, the things will be very simple. You will enjoy working or learning once you get into a project. But if you by heart, it will be very difficult. What is what? Now, based on your requirement, can I have my database running also within cluster, or can I have my database running in my own data center also if required? Your application parts are running in managed Kubernetes clusters like EKS. Is it possible for me to connect those applications with the databases? The database might be running in your own data center servers also. But make sure you need to have a connectivity. Cloud to AWS, cloud to on-prem, cloud to on-prem, using some connectivity services like AWS Direct Connect, AWS site-to-site VPN, transit gateways. There are services available to establish the connectivity from AWS to your own data center also. If you know those concepts, will it be simple? Understanding the architecture, understanding the application will become simple. Now, I want to run my database also in my Kubernetes. I'm giving this like this. What is the another environment variable that application is expecting? That application is expecting username. Whatever username, value, devdb, something like this. Another environment variable, that password, devdb @ 123. Guys, is this always same? Does all the applications, whatever you deploy, always same like this? No, that is depends on your application, your requirement. Okay. Now I'm passing like this, all the details. Now, if I want to access this Spring application from outside the cluster, do I need a service for this? Do I need a service for this? So do I need to create a service for this application also? Now I am saying service name, sorry, service name as Spring App SVC. Whatever labels I have given for this application, labels Spring App, port, any port, it can be 80 or 8080. Your target port is your container port. Now this is one thing, but does this works alone? If there is no database configured and if there is no database running, does this application works as expected? No. Then can I have a database also deployed in my Kubernetes as a pod? Maybe in a same YML also you can write, or another YML also you can use. But the databases, are you going to frequently update the way you are going to update your applications? Are you going to frequently update your databases? No. So whatever you want to go, whether you want to go with replica set also you can go, whether you want to go with deployment also you can go, but real time, which is recommended, as I already told, to deploy the stateful applications, what is the recommended Kubernetes object or resource is stateful set. Stateful set. But for now, let me use replica set. For now, let me use replica set or replication controller or deployment, whatever it is. For now, let me use replica set. That doesn't matter for now. App/v1 replica set MongoDB. Guys, database, I'll run as of now only one replica. I will run only as of now one replica. Even though you give two replicas, that is not going to work the way you are going to expect. It is like two different databases. It is going to have like a two different databases. Even though you give replicas as two, it is like a two different databases. If you need to have a high availability in the databases, do I need to have some kind of a cluster setup in the databases, like primary DB, secondary DB? The primary DB will flush all the data to the secondary DB. We need to have a database also as a cluster. You need to have a database also as a cluster. So if you just give replicas as two, it is not going to work the way you are going to expect. If you are going to give replicas as two, it is not going to work the way you are expecting. If you want to have a high availability in the database also, to do that kind of a setup, like multiple database replicas, there should be a primary DB, secondary DB. Then if I want to achieve that requirement, is it possible with replica set or deployment? No. But is that possible? That is not possible, guys. With replicas and deployment, that is not possible. So if you want to have that kind of a stateful applications as a clusters, like database cluster in Kubernetes, or Kafka cluster in Kubernetes, or RabbitMQ cluster, like a primary, secondary of a cluster, then is that possible if I go with a stateful set? Can I set up that kind of an environment within Kubernetes? Can I have that kind of a clusters setups? Yes. That I will explain later. That I will explain later when I explain stateful set. I will explain later what is stateful set, how it works. For now, I am using a replica set. So even though you give replicas as to, that won't work. So I am removing that number of replicas. So by default, how many replicas I will have for this database? Only one. Now let me give something like this. Mongo, selector is Mongo, label is Mongo, container is MongoDB container, like this. Can I use image? That image is already available. I'm giving something like this, the image name Mongo. So do I have an image available in the Docker Hub for database also? that Mongo. Now I am not mentioning any tag. I am not mentioning any tag. So which tag will be used? What image will be used? Suppose you have a requirement. You have a requirement. You want to use a different version of Mongo database. You want to use different version of Mongo database. Then can you use specific tag like this? Whatever tag you want to use, like 4.4, 5.3, like that. Yes. Now I am giving empty, so colon latest. What is the database port, that container port of Mongo? 27017. 27017. Now, while creating this database also, if you remember, do I need to initialize my database with root username and password? Do I need to protect my database with some username and password? That how you have, how this application, this database container is expected to pass, how it is expected to pass that root username and password also as a environment variable. As a environment variable, can I pass something like this? Env again, name, name. But is this environment variable same as whatever you are using for your application like this? The names of the variables, is it same like this? No, that is different. That is different, right? If you understand this description, are they saying if you want to initialize database with some root username and password, use environment variables like this? If you see, are they giving something like this here? Environment variables, when you start your Mongo, you can adjust initialization of MongoDB by passing one or more environment variables, something like this. So can I use those things? Name is this, value whatever I'm using, whatever username I want to use, password whatever password I want to use. You are initializing database with this username and this password. But if you are passing different username and password, these usernames and passwords will be used by your application to connect to database. Let's say I'm giving wrong password. My database is initialized with this password, but I'm using different password. Will it throw some kind of authentication error? Yes. So make sure I'm using same details. My database is initialized with this username, this password. Now, do I need to have a service? If your application has to connect to this database, do I need to have a service for this database pods? Service, Kubernetes service. What type of service I'll create? Does this request to be a node port service? Does this request to be a node port service? No, because I want to access this database within the cluster. Only my application parts can talk to the cluster. From outside the cluster, I don't want to access this database. Then can I do cluster IP service? That is the default one also if you don't pass. Now my label, whatever labels I have for this database, label, port. Guys, here it is not recommended to do like this because this is not a web application. It's a TCP. So basically 80 in the sense it's kind of some API, some kind of a web application. It is not a web application or API. It's a database. So I will use same as is 27017 and target port is also 27017. If you see in your application code, they have hard coded port 27017. Service name we are passing as a variable 27017. They have hard coded. Let's say, suppose you have created a service like this. Suppose you have created a service like this. Do you think it will work? Because that is hard coded as a 27017. It won't work. So I am using same 27017, that is service port. Now let me deploy. You want to deploy individually? Deploy individually. If I want to deploy together also, can I deploy together by having this one also in same YML? Can I deploy together also if required, or I can deploy individually also? Now here it is giving some kind of a warning. This warning is because of that plugin. What it is saying, one or more containers does not have a resource limits. It is recommended. They are saying this container does not have any resource limits. It is recommended. So if you want to give resource requests and limits, give it. Otherwise, leave it. Fine. Now, nowhere I am mentioning namespace. In which namespace all these deployment services, this deployment, this pod services will be created? Default. Now, if I do like this namespace, this deployment and its parts will be created in which namespace? Now, do I need to make sure service also gets created in same namespace for that one? Yes. Now, if required, can I have this database in a separate namespace by creating a separate namespace like MongoNS or DBNS like this? If required, by creating a separate namespace. Otherwise, if I don't give any namespace for this database service and this database part, in which namespace it gets created? Default. Now your application is in this namespace, your database is different namespace. If you give service name like this, do you think will it work? Do you think will it work? Then do I need to give what here? If this application is in different namespace, if your database service is in different namespace, FQDN. So do I need to give FQDN like this? Default, that namespace name. If it is in a default namespace, mongo svc.default.svc.cluster.local, something like this. Suppose if this is in a different namespace like db, database ns, or mongo ns like this, that namespace. For now, let me create everything in a same namespace. For now, let me create this one also in same namespace. Then FQDN is not mandatory. That service also in same namespace. Guys, the service name here, let's say service name I have given as Mongo. I am giving service name as Mongo, but your application is using this as a host name. Do you think it will resolve? No. So make sure you are giving that name. Now, hope you are familiar what is what, whatever we discussed so far. Now, let's say you want this application parts to be scaled automatically whenever there is a load. You want this application parts to be scaled automatically whenever you have a load. Then what other object you can create for this deployment? What is the another Kubernetes object which you can create so that whenever there is a load on that application, that parts get scaled automatically? HPA, HPA, which we just discussed yesterday. Okay. So based on the requirement, now let me give replicas here for this application part. I am giving replicas as 2. Now let me deploy everything. Guys, before deploying, let me delete the existing applications, because do I have my Kubernetes cluster with enough nodes, enough CPU, enough memory to deploy too many applications? I don't have too many nodes in the cluster to deploy too many applications in this. So let me connect to my Kubernetes machine. I have a nodes. Our nodes are ready. Let me see if I have anything in the default namespace. In the default namespace, some application is running. If I do like this, delete all -, all, is it going to delete everything in whatever in the current namespace? Default namespace I have deleted. Now I have some applications in this namespace. Now I will delete all these things. Guys, one more thing. If I delete namespace, what will happen to the objects which are running in that namespace. Suppose I am executing like this, I am deleting a namespace itself. What will happen to the resources which is running in that namespace? Is that objects also gets deleted? Is that applications gets deleted? Yes. So I don't want to delete namespace. Can I delete something like this? All the objects? Or you can delete individually. Delete service of this one, service of this one, delete deployment also, like that. You can delete. Now I'm deleting all these resources, but don't execute on this cube system namespace, guys. Don't do anything on the cube system namespace. Okay. Now let me deploy this application. Let me deploy this application. Now, if required, can I have all these things maintained in my version control system like SCM tools like GitHub? Can I use this to automate the process of building and deploying the images also using Jenkins to Kubernetes by maintaining all these manifest in the version control system? You can do that. Now, let me deploy. I have some kind of a indentation. Let me fix this here. It will work, but for better readability, let me have something like this. Now let me, how many Kubernetes resources will be created now if I apply this manifest? If I apply this manifest, is it going to create a deployment? One deployment. That a deployment, is it going to internally create a replica set and pods? The deployment will internally create a replica set and pods, and one service for this application, and one replica set for database, and another service for database. Now let me apply. Now deployment is created successfully, service is created successfully. There is a problem. Unknown field app, unknown field app. So where exactly it is failed? It is partially done. It is partially done. Where exactly it is failed? In the replica set. In the replica set, I have this replica set, right? Database. In this, I have lot of resources. In this replica set, I am using labels like this. But will it support like this? Does replica set supports like this? That has to be under match labels. Match labels. Something like this. Now let me apply. Only your Spring application deployment and service is created. Rest of the other two are not created. Still, I have some error. Unknown field. Still, I have something called error. Now, where did I? Sorry, I have modified at a wrong location. I have modified at a wrong location. Let me remove this. This is my part template. This is my part template. I have to view that here in the selectors. Match labels. Now let me apply this. Now is my stateless application and is my stateful application also running in the Kubernetes as a pods? Now this one, you should guess what is the problem. Database pod container is getting created. Database pod container is getting created. But for this application, your Spring application, it is giving error image pull. This could be because of some wrong image tag or registry. Let me see. Docker hands-on Spring -boot -app. It is not app. The repository name is what? Something like this. The repository name was Mongo. Since it's a deployment, do I need to delete and apply? Since it's a deployment, do I need to delete and apply? No. Is that parts gets updated now? Since I have updated my part template, is that parts get updated now? Now I am getting new parts, but it is in a pending state. Why it is in a pending state? Because of no resources available. For this parts also, it has reserved some CPU. For this parts also, it has reserved some CPU and memory. Now this is in a pending state. If you see why it is in pending state, how can I know? If I see the logs, do you think anything will be available like this? Pod itself is not created. If I execute logs, will you able to see anything here? No. Let me describe my pod. Let me describe my pod. And if you describe your pod, now what it is trying to say? 0 by 3 nodes are available. One node has a insufficient memory. One node has a insufficient memory. One node doesn't have enough memory. And what about another node? Another node has a taint. Another node has a taint. What do you mean by taint? We already discussed. Do we have a master node which has a taint? Since our parts are not tolerating, so it is not considering. What about other node? What do you mean by this error? So another node has a disk pressure. Another node has a disk pressure, like lot of IO operations are going on. So that has a disk pressure. Which node has a disk pressure? Let me see. Describe pod, describe node. Let me see if this node has a disk pressure or other node has a disk pressure. Let me see. Kubelet has no disk pressure. Sufficient memory is there for kubelet. Kubelet is ready. So we don't have any issue with this node. Maybe issue with this 206 node. There might be a lot of disk pressure. What do you mean by disk pressure? Now it is saying node has a disk pressure. It is ready, it is fine, but it has a disk pressure. What do you mean by disk pressure? Lot of IOs, lot of in and input output operations are going on. So if you see this node has a disk pressure, what do you mean by that? Disk pressure is a condition indicate that that node is using too much disk space or using disk space too fast. But it will be automatically resolved. You no need to do nothing. After some time, it will be automatically resolved. If it is already fully utilized the disk, you need to increase the disk. You need to increase the disk size. So disk pressure is a condition indicating that node is using too much disk space or using disk space too fast according to the threshold sets for your Kubernetes configuration. If your application needs more space, then do you need to increase the size of the disk if it is running? Yes. But now it not might be because of running out of disk. I may have still some storage, but lot of IOs are happening. Lot of IOs are happening. After some time, that might be resolved. After some time, that might be resolved. Now let me show you. Let me go inside that. Let me go inside the 206 node. Let me SSH to the 206 node. Let me SSH to the 206, which has a disk pressure. Memory pressure is different. Disk pressure is different. Disk pressure in the sense storage. Let me go inside this. Now, if you see that root disk, right? That root disk, we still have some storage available. Now it is trying to read and write lot of data. because of that error image pull, it is trying to pull the image and it is not able to find. Lot of IOs are happening. That's why it is showing as disk pressure. Now, if you see, after some time that might auto resolve. After some time that might auto resolve. If you describe the node after some time, now is it came back normal? Node has no disk pressure now. This node has no disk pressure now. Now, whatever pod which was in pending because other node is having insufficient CPU, this doesn't have enough memory, but it is not able to schedule this one because that time it was having a disk pressure. Now there is no disk pressure. Now can I see that pod might be scheduled in that node, whatever it was in pending state? Now if you see, is that pod scheduled and old pods got terminated? Old pods got terminated. These type of issues are common, guys. You should be good at understanding the errors and troubleshooting the errors. These type of errors are common. Disk pressure, memory pressure. Now, is my parts are scheduled in 206 now? Yes. Now, let me access that application. Let me access that application. From outside, I want to access that application. Can I use that respective node port of that service? Now, this application, okay. What type of service I have created for this Spring App SVC? Since I have not mentioned any type, what type of service by default, guys? Cluster IP. Now, I want to access this outside. For now, can I say type as node port? I can imperatively also edit, or I can declaratively also modify. I can imperatively also edit, or I can declaratively also modify. kubectl apply again. Now, if I see, can I use this port? Node port 31826. Whatever node, any node, that can be your master node you can use, or that can be worker node you can use. You can use any node, but make sure you open the port in that server security group. If you are using this node, go to that server security group, edit inbound rules, open that port. Now, using this server IP address, public IP, using that server public IP, I can access. Now, am I able to access that application? The application which is running as a pod container, and internally is this application is communicating with one stateful application called database, Mongo database. My application also running as a pod, my database also running as a pod. Is that application pod is able to communicate with the database pod using that service name in Kubernetes? Now, this is a stateless application. If something goes wrong with this stateless application pods, do I need to worry? Now these pods, if something goes wrong with this stateless pod, do I need to worry? Because nothing is getting maintained or stored in this pod containers. Now let's say I'm intentionally deleting. This pod can go down for any reason. This pod can go down for any reason. I'm intentionally deleting this pod. I have another pod. For high availability, I have another pod. I can access that. But do I have a data loss? Do I have a data loss if there is a this pod is went down? Do I have a data loss? I have still, I can see the data because nothing we are maintaining. But if something goes wrong with this application, I mean to say this pod, that stateful set, that stateful application, the stateful application pod like database pod is getting deleted. That can happen for many reasons. One reason, one reason can be, let's consider your database pod is running in this node as of now. This database pod is running in this node. Let's consider there is a issue with this node. This node went down. Now, does Kubernetes will try to shift the pod to other node? Does pod will be recreated? If something went wrong with this node, your node went down, does Kubernetes will try to shift the pod to other node? Because this is managed as a controller, replication controller. Is it going to make sure you have one replica for that? If something goes wrong with this node, does Kubernetes will try to recreate that pod in a different node? That is one use case. The pod will be recreated. So in that case, do you have a data loss? Because pod is completely deleted and created. Do you have a data loss? Yes. And also, even though there is no issue with this node, even though there is no issue with this node, let's assume there is a OOM out of memory. Your container is killed and your container is restarted. Do you have a data loss again? Even though there is no issue with that node? Yes. Now, I'm intentionally deleting that pod. But since there is a controller, is it going to recreate that pod? I'm going to get pod again. I'm going to get pod again. That pod is running, but what about the data? What about the data? Now, will I able to see the data? What our data have inserted? No. We have a data loss. Is this acceptable in any application? Now, how can I maintain the state? How can I maintain the state now in Kubernetes? How can I maintain the state? State is nothing but data about that process. Here also can I use a concept of volumes? Here also can I use a concept of volumes? Yes, volumes and volume modes. As of now, am I using any volumes for this stateful applications like databases? No. Now Kubernetes supports different volumes. Kubernetes also supports different volumes. We can use any of the volume, n number of volumes also simultaneously. Now we have a concept of volumes here. We have a concept of volumes here. As I already told, so as I already discussed, guys, as I already discussed, you already know container file system lives as long as the container does. So when a container terminates or restarted, the file system changes are lost. Whatever file systems, whatever files we have as part of the container file system, yes, which you already know. Volumes in Kubernetes are very easy to manage. Basically, it's a storage. It's a directory that gets mounted to the pod. We can mount some storage to the pod. Once I mount the storage to the pod, then can I tell the container to use that value to store the information in that? The container can use that value to store that information. So if I am using volumes, you can safely modify the pods without losing your data. Without losing your data, you can modify your pods. Your pods, even though pods are getting recreated, restored, you don't have a data loss. Kubernetes supports many types of volumes. Kubernetes supports many types of volumes. And also, does a pod can use n number of volumes simultaneously? Can I attach multiple volumes to the pod? Or is it possible to attach only one volume? No. You can attach n number of values to the pod. Kubernetes supports many types of values, and also pod can use any number of values simultaneously. For more consistent storage that is independent of the container, we can use a value. So these values are especially important for what type of applications? As I already told, stateful apps such as databases, Jenkins, Kafka, RabbitMQ, Redis cache, Memcache, these type of applications if you are running as a pods in Kubernetes. So to use a value, a pod specify what values to be provided for pod. So using this in the pod template, using this field, can I say what values I want to use for that pod? Using this field in the pod template, using this field in the pod template, like this. This is your pod template. This is your pod template. In this pod template, the way I have a containers, the way I have a containers, we have a one more section here called values. In your pod spec, in your pod spec, in your pod spec, you can define the values. So can I have n number of values attached like this to that pod? We are just attaching the value. But if this values has to be used by the containers, if this values has to be used by the containers, do I need to use this value mounts field in the container section like this? This is one of the container in that pod. So do I need to use this value mounts so that these values we are attaching to the pod and we are telling the container to use that value and mount. So using these two options, can I attach values and can I use those values? Can I mount those values to the containers? Now, as I already told, suppose if I have two containers or more than one container in that pod, can I attach same value to the multiple containers also within that pod? Suppose I have another container also, can I use same value if required? So that one container can read the data, another container can write the data to the same storage if required. One container can write the data, another container can read the data like that. Is that possible? Yes. We already discussed that use case. Now, Kubernetes supports different types of values. One is host path value, another one is mtdir value, like NFS value, persistent value claim, config map, secret, EBS, Azure disk, Azure file, Google persistent disk, like n number of values it will support. But is it depends on the infrastructure which you are using? Is it depends on the Kubernetes cluster, the environment which you are running your Kubernetes cluster? Yes. Let's say I am running my Kubernetes cluster on Azure. Will I able to use this EBS block storage? Suppose I am running my Kubernetes cluster in Azure. Will I able to use this? No. Suppose I am running my Kubernetes cluster as a managed Kubernetes cluster like EKS. If I am using EKS to provision the Kubernetes cluster, can I use EBS values to my Kubernetes pods? EBS values to my Kubernetes pods. Suppose if I am using Azure AKS, can I use this to Azure file or Azure disk if I am running AKS cluster? Yes. Suppose if I am running GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine, can I use this GCE, Google Persistent Disk? So you have different types of values you can leverage based on the environment. Now let's say, can I use host path? Can I use host path if required? What do you mean by host path? The name itself it is saying host path. Host path. What is host? What do you mean by host? That server. That server. On that server you have a pod. So can I mount some directory? Can I mount some directory from the underlying server where my pod is scheduled? Can I attach some directory to the pod from the underlying server? Host path. It is not home directory path. Host path in the sense host. Host is nothing but your server, where your containers, where your pods are hosted. Kind of a local volumes in the Docker, guys. Kind of a bind mounts. Kind of a bind mounts. In the Docker, did we discuss the concept called bind mount? So will I able to mount some directory to the container in the Docker using bind mounts concept? Similarly, it is exactly same here host path. So it's host path, which means will I able to mount any directory from the underlying host to my pod here? Yes, that is host path. That is host path. Now, sometimes in the interviews, they are going to ask different questions on these volumes. Volumes are very important. Kubernetes volumes. As I already told, Kubernetes supports many types of volumes. I already explained all these things already. The containers are ephemeral. If something goes wrong with your container, when container is crashes, kubelet will restart your container with a clean state. So you will not have all the data, whatever you have. So Docker has a concept of volumes. Similarly, Kubernetes also supports many types of volumes. Pod can use n number of volumes simultaneously. All these things I have already explained. As I told, Kubernetes supports several types of volumes like Elastic Block Store, EBS. Now, Azure Disk, Azure File, ShepFS. Suppose you are using some kind of an on-prem storage solution. You have your infrastructure in your own data center. You have your infrastructure in your own data center. You have provisioned your Kubernetes cluster in your own data center. So there are some storage solutions like a SAN, storage area networks, NAS, network attached storage. There are different storage concepts. Suppose if you have your own storage area network using ShepFS, will I able to provision the storage in that your own storage area which is managed in your own data center using these type of things also? Yes. So you have a ShepFS, config map as a volume, mtdir as a volume, secret as a volume, Google persistent disk. There are several types of volumes supported by Kubernetes. Can I use NFS also if required? NFS, network file system. In your own data center, you have your own NFS server. Is it possible for me to mount NFS with my pods? Yes. It supports lot of volumes, guys. Now, sometimes in the interview, they are going to ask these type of questions. What is host path value in Kubernetes? Or what is host path? What is mtdir? mtdir in Kubernetes? So sometimes they are asking these type of questions. So there is one type called mtdir. There is one volume type called mtdir. So what is this mtdir value? So mtdir value first created when pod is assigned to the node. So whenever your pod is assigned to node, if you are using this mtdir value, it will be created when the pod is assigned to that node, and it exists. That mtdir value exists as long as the pod is running on that node. As long as the pod is running on that node, that mtdir value will be existed in that node. So as the name says itself, this value will be initially empty. The value will be initially empty directory. If I mount this mtdir value with my containers will write the data to that mtdir value, but that mtdir value exists as long as the pod is running on that node. Let's say pod is removed from that node. Does that mtdir value, that storage also gets deleted from that node? If the pod is deleted from that node, Does that mtdir value also gets deleted? Yes. But if the container is crashed, container is restarted, does mtdir value is safe even though your container crashed and restarted in the same node? Does the mtdir value is safe? Yes. So the mtdir value will be available as long as the pod is running, even though the container is restarted in the same node, same pod, container is crashed. It won't have any problem. But if the pod is rescheduled to a different node, does that mtdir value gets deleted in that node? Yes. It is like a temporary. It is like a temporary. Is it recommended to use this mtdir value for persistent storage, persistent data, evergreen data? No. It is like a temporary storage. So mtdir value is not recommended to use for a persistent storages. So it is like a temporary file system. Now, the way we have a mtdir value, we have another type of value called host path. We have another value called host path. What is this host path? As I already told, host path value, basically we can mount a file or directory from the host file system into your pod. A host path value is basically we can mount a file or directory from host file system to your pod. Is it like a bind mount in Docker? Is this host path is like a bind mount in Docker? So which gets mounted from the underlying host. Now let me use this now. Let me demonstrate. I am not using any value. If my pods are getting deleted and recreated, I am lost. I am losing my data. Now can I use a values now with my database pod? I don't want that to happen. I can use values for my database. For this one, I don't need because it's a stateless application. I don't need. For my database, can I use values concept here? Something like this. But is this correct? Is the indentation correct when I am defining the values? Is this correct? And again, is this is also correct? Is this is also correct? Values? No. Values are siblings of your containers. Like this. Like this. Values. Siblings of your containers. Guys, can I define values first, containers next in the part spec? Can I define this values first, container next? Yes, that is also fine. Name of the value. Can I give something like this? MongoDB, some name, something like this, any name, any name. Now, what type of value? Can I say something like this? Host path, host path. Within that host path, I can give the path. I can give the path. So this path is expected where? Do I need to have this directory in the underlying system? Maybe something like this, or maybe something like this. Something like this. This path should be part of your server. Let's consider your database pod is getting scheduled here. Your database pod is getting scheduled here. Now, I am using a host path value. Now, I am giving something like this, a /mongo. So, is this directory expected from underlying host? I'm giving something like this, Mongo data. In the root directory, I'm giving Mongo data. It is expected here, the directory. Even though this directory doesn't exist, does Kubernetes will create a directory to attach the directory to this pod? Does Kubernetes will create this directory in the system wherever that pod is scheduled? Yes. Now, this is my path. If I just define like this, does this value will be used by your container in that pod? If I just define like this, No. Then how can I tell my container to use this value? My container to use this value, do I need to use this volume mounts, something like this, volume mounts? Now here again, name and mount path, mount path, name and mount path. Mount path, to which path of your container you want to mount, that is as per your use case, as per your application, your container. So to which path I want to mount the value in this container, to which directory I want to mount in this container. What is the mount path, guys? What is the mount path? Mongo data? No, it is not Mongo data, guys. It is data/db. So data/db. So this is the directory of my container which I want to mount with this value. But how can I link? How can I link this value mount with value? What should be the common here? Whatever name I have used here, the value name, can I use that as a mount name here? Which means, is this directory gets mounted with this value now? Now is this directory gets mounted with this value now, because whatever name I am using here, the same name I am using as a value mount name. So this way, is this host path directory gets mounted with my container directory now? But without defining this values, can I use value mounts or vice versa? Without defining values, can I use value mounts, or without defining value mounts, is this value will be used? No. This is how I am creating. If required, can I attach multiple values also, guys? The way I am attaching one value, can I attach one more value? Can I use with a different path if required? Can I use for different path another folder of my container also I want to mount? Can I use another value, another mount, n number of values simultaneously? Yes. Now this is what we are doing here. But since it's a replica set, if I apply this, do you think your Mongo database pods will be recreated with those values? If I apply also, do you think that does that Mongo database pods will be recreated with values? Is your pods are getting deleted and recreated? No, because that is managed as what? That is managed as what? The database pod is managed as what? Replica set. Does replica set will delete and update the pods? No. Now I don't want to do this is not reflecting. Then can I delete that replica set and again apply to reflect? I'll delete the RS. I'll delete that replica set. The replica set of database. The replica set of database I'm deleting. Then again I will apply. Again I will apply. Now there are changes in my pod template. Is my database pod is using volumes now? Is this database pod is using volumes now? If I describe, will I able to see? If I describe, will I able to see that volumes kubectl describe pod, describe this pod in this namespace? Now can I see something called like this? Values. MongoDB host val, type is host path. Type is host path, a bare host directory value. This is the path. Is that value is used with this container? Is that value is used with this container mounts that data/db from this value? What this stands for RW? What this stands for RW? Read, write, read and write, read and write. Is it possible to use read-only values? Only containers, pods can read, but pods cannot write the data. Can I use read-only volumes also? Yes, that is also possible. Now, in whatever node it has scheduled, in which node that pod is scheduled? Let's see. In which node the database pod is scheduled now? 206. Now, if I go to 206, let's see, this is 206. In this 206, can I see some folder in the root that is, I have given host path as slash mongo data. Now, can I already see some files got created here? Because the database pod, the database container is started writing this one. But this is empty data, empty storage, raw, new storage, new value. Will I have any data as of now? Because that is empty. Now let me start writing the data. Now, is your database is maintaining this data in the whatever volume I have attached? If you see ls-lar /mongo data. Now can I see some files are getting updated, created within this directory, but who is doing all these things? Is your database pod, is your database container is using this storage to write the data? Now, even though you delete or something went wrong with your database pod, I am deleting that pod intentionally. Do we still have data safely available in the underlying host? I am deleting that pod intentionally. Now, pod is recreated. Pod is recreated in the same node. That is important. Pod is recreated in the same node where originally it was running. In the same node, pod is created. Now, is it again pod started using same storage, same volume, whatever I have defined as per my pod manifest? Now, if I refresh, do I have a data loss now? Because it was using same value. But one catch here, let's assume for some reason the database pod is scheduled to a different node. For some reason your database pod is scheduled to a different node. What happens if I am using host path value? Data is not lost, data is still there here, but is it going to start using new storage here in this? From this host, is it going to use some new folder here again, that mongo data? The data is still there, but what happens if the node is scheduled to a new node, different node, your pod is scheduled? Is it going to use this directory? You have some data in this host, but the pod is rescheduled here. Do you have a data consistency here? If this is going to happen, do you have a consistency in your data? No. So if I am using host path values, if pods are getting rotated, if parts are getting moving around your cluster to a different nodes, do you have a data consistency? You have a state, but that state is not consistent. In this case, do I need to use some process outside of Kubernetes? Kubernetes will not handle this. Do I need to have some process outside of Kubernetes, kind of a rsync process, or any process which will sync all your maybe different nodes storages? You can use some kind of rsync process that is outside of your Kubernetes. Kubernetes will not handle this. If I have some kind of rsync process, is it going to sync this server storage with this server storage? If you create a process, that rsync process, then you have a consistency. But if you don't have rsync, if you are using host path value, your pods are roaming around in the cluster, scheduled to different nodes, there is no consistency in the data. Is everyone clear what is host path value, how it works? Now, instead of using host path, kind of a local values, is it possible for me to use external values, external storages instead of using host path values? Is it possible for me to use external values like NFS, like NFS or EBS or Azure file, Azure disk, NFS or EFS, like this, based on the infrastructure, based on the infrastructure. Now, if I am using external storages, suppose let's consider I am using NFS. Let's consider I am using NFS. Even though your pods are moving around, whether pod is running in this node or some other node, do we have a consistency? If I am using external values like EFS, NFS, EBS, Azure file, Azure disk, Google persistent disk, even though your pods are shifting around like this guy is very naughty. He's not, sitting simple like our kids. He is roaming around. Then, do we still have a consistency here in the data? And one more thing, even though your node, your cluster itself is gone, something went wrong with your Kubernetes nodes itself. Do we still have your data, persistent data, evergreen data available? Guys, this volumes, as I already told, is it a backup or is it a mount? Don't consider this as a backup. It's a mount. It's a mount point. So can I mount my pods with external values? External values in the sense storages which is outside of your Kubernetes nodes. So we can use external values like this: NFS, EBS, Azure file, Azure disk, or Google persistent disk, Google persistent disk, based on the infrastructure. Based on the infrastructure. Now, as I already told, is it possible the way we attached additional EBS volume to my server when I was when I was discussing about AWS, the way I have attached additional volume, that volume I have mounted with some directory in my server, can I do same thing for my pods also? Can I create additional EBS volume? Does that EBS volume can be used with your pods, your container directories? The way we have done in the server level, we can do that in the container level, your pod level. You can create additional EBS volumes. That EBS volumes will be attached to that server. That server, basically, it will attach to that pod, that container. So this container can start writing the data to this EBS or NFS based on your infrastructure. Yes. Now let's say I'll demonstrate with NFS now. I'll demonstrate with NFS now, so that you can understand what is NFS also. As I already discussed in AWS, EFS is nothing but a native NFS. What is the full form of NFS? What is the full form of NFS? Network File System. So in the AWS, we have a service called EFS. It's a native NFS, which means AWS will manage this file system for you. Now let me create a NFS. Let's assume you have your own data center, your Kubernetes cluster, your Kubernetes nodes are running in your own data center. Can I provision one virtual machine in my data center itself? Can I configure NFS? Can I start using this NFS storage with my pods, containers if required in your own data center if you have a Kubernetes cluster? External storage, like a network file system. Now, we don't have any data center. Can I create one EC2 instance and use that EC2 instance to configure that NFS to demonstrate. Yes. So let me create one server. Let me create one server to configure the NFS. But is that server is part of your EC cluster? Whatever server I am creating, does that will be part of your cluster? Is it your worker? Is it your master? No. Now I am trying to create one server. I am tagging that as a NFS server. I am tagging that as a NFS server. You can use Red Hat, you can use Ubuntu, that doesn't matter here because I am not going to install any Docker or Kubernetes related softwares here. So let me take Ubuntu or Red Hat also fine. I am taking Ubuntu. I am tagging that as NFS server, and NFS server, we need to open some port. Again, I am creating in a same VPC, same network where I have my Kubernetes cluster. If my NFS server is in different network, my Kubernetes servers are in different network. Again, do I need to do some kind of a peering to use these NFS volumes again? Yes. So I'm making sure I'm creating in the same VPC. Here, I need to open some port. I need to open some port. I'm clicking on that network settings. What is the port which I need to open, guys? That NFS port. Anyone remember NFS port? 2049. If you don't know also, here, can I select one option called NFS? It will automatically show. There is one option called NFS. So what is the default port which will listen? NFS will listen on which port? 2049. Now here, instead of opening for everywhere, can I open only for that range, my network range where I have my Kubernetes servers? Where I have my Kubernetes servers? Yes. Now let me create a server. Let me create a server. Then can I install NFS network file system? Can I configure my NFS shares manually here? Because this is not a managed service. You are just using infrastructure. You are just using infrastructure. On top of that infrastructure, can I configure whatever software I need like NFS, create NFS shares here? Yes. So once this server is ready, let me connect to this NFS server. Let me connect to this NFS server. Once this server is ready, it is going to take some time, maybe just 1 or 2 minutes. It will be ready. It will be ready in 1 or 2 minutes. Let's wait for that. Guys, if you do any mistakes like not opening the ports or not installing the client software like NFS client software in your Kubernetes nodes or not opening ports, if you try to mount NFS volumes, is it going to work? No. So make sure you are doing everything properly. Now let me connect to this NFS server. Let me connect to this NFS server. So maybe here, let me connect to this machine. This is my NFS server. Let's consider. As of now, nothing is running. Do I have any process running, that NFS process as of now in this machine? I don't have any NFS. Do I have anything listening on port 2049? Do I have anything which is listening on 2049 as of now in this server? So I don't have a netstat. Let me install netstat. If you see, as of now, do I have anything running on that 2049 NFS port here? No. So first let me install NFS. Let me configure NFS in this machine. Let me install NFS and let me configure NFS shares in this machine. So you can follow some websites like how to install NFS in Ubuntu all those things. Otherwise, I'll share the installation instructions. So I'll share the installation instructions. I'm installing this NFS server package. Utils is a client. Utils is a client. I am not, this is my NFS server, not NFS client. So utils has to be installed in client machines. So this is not a client machine. This is a server where I am running my NFS. So, but when I go for EFS, who has done all these things? Who created a VMs for your NFS and who is done all these NFS configurations? If I go for EFS, that is done by AWS itself in the background. Now I am just using NFS on my own. Now let me install this package NFS kernel server. This is a server. Unable to locate this package. So I may need to update my package manager. Let's see. After updating the package manager, let's see. I have updated the package manager. Then I am installing. There might be a typo. Kernel KERNEL. There is one more additional KERNEL. There is additional R was there because of that. So now that NFS kernel software, that is a server side software we have installed. Now I'll create a NFS directories, NFS share. I want to share some directory from this host to my client machines. So I can create some NFS folders, share directories, something like this I am doing. MKDA or whatever, you are creating a directory, something like this. This is the shared directory which I will be mounting with client machines, from the client machines. So I'm creating one directory, and this directory will be accessed from remote clients over network. So do I need to change permissions? Because this is accessed by remote clients. So I will give like all the permissions like this. I will change the ownership also. Sudo ch own, no owner, no group, ch own, recursively, nobody, no owner, nobody, and there is no group, recursively for that shared directory. I have done this. Then I will make some configurations in the exports file. I'll change something in the exports file. This is NFS related settings. In this exports file in the etc folder, I'm going to make this available for the NFS clients. My directory is this NFS underscore share. Here I can give star also like this. What that star indicates? Any client, all these are NFS options, guys. Whatever I am doing here, it is nothing to do with Docker, it is nothing to do with Kubernetes. This star indicates any client can read and write the data from this NFS share. It can sync the data, right? There is no subtree check, root permissions are not required to do this. These are NFS related settings. I can give star also, which means any client, any IP. Is it possible for me to restrict this sharing this NFS with some specific IP addresses, some clients also if required? Can I give like this 132.31.8.9? So even though I have open port, that except this machine, does anyone can share? Anyone can mount this directory of NFS? If I give like this, no. If required, can I give the range also? Because my Kubernetes is running in one VPC, can I give that range like this also? Instead of star, can I give that range also like this? Now, does these Kubernetes nodes will become clients to that NFS? This node or this node, because this is where my pods are running. So does this node or this node? Does these guys becomes a client to this NFS? So can I give that range? That range, instead of giving single IP like this, instead of giving single IP like this, can I give the range also, so that any IP in this range can access this NFS directory from this server? Otherwise, I can give star also. It's up to you. Is this anything related to Docker, containers, Kubernetes, pods? No. This is NFS concept. Let me give like this. Let me give like this. Star I have given. Once that is done, I need to restart my NFS service. I need to restart my NFS service. To do that, what I'll do, first I will execute one command to reflect those changes. Export fs -a. Then I'll restart my NFS service. Sudo systemctl restart nfs-kernel-server. I am restarting. So I have done the changes. NFS settings are done. Now instead of using something like this, instead of using something like this in host path, instead of using something like this, can I use NFS volumes? Can I use NFS volume for this database pod? Now, instead of using something like this, instead of using host path, now can I say NFS instead of host path? Can I say NFS name type? Now, when it comes to NFS, there are two things here. One is server, another one is path. One is server, NFS server, another one is path. Here I need to give some details. What details I need to give here? What details I need to give here? Do I need to give the host name or IP address of that NFS server? Host name or IP address of that NFS server? Now, in real time, can I use private IP itself, that NFS server private IP? Because even though you start the server, this IP will not change as long as they're in the same VPC, same network, or if there is a VPC pairing that can communicate using private IPs itself. I'm using that private IP. Then what is this path? What is this path? What is my NFS share which I have configured from that server? Which directory can be mounted from clients? Can I give that name? MNT NFS underscore share. This is the directory of my NFS server. Now, this one can be anything. This one can be anything. You can just give like this MongoDB val, this can be anything. Now, because of this, is your container, is your Kubernetes pod gets mounted with this NFS volumes instead of host path volumes? Yes. But before I do this, do I need to have a client softwares available, client softwares installed in your nodes from where you are getting, where you are using this NFS mounts? If you remember, while discussing EFS also, did I install client software in the server where I have mounted that EFS? Now, do I need to have this NFS client software installed in my Kubernetes servers before I use this NFS value? Now, let me do that. I'll install my NFS client software. If you don't install client software, if you directly start mounting, do you think will it work? No. So I am connecting to all my nodes. Why I am installing in all the nodes? Because any node your pod can come. In any node your pod can come. If that pod has to use NFS value, do I need to have that NFS client in that node? So I am trying to install that in all the nodes. So this is AWS Ubuntu server. Can I use apt install instead of m install? Because this is Ubuntu server, apt install. The package is not NFS utils. This NFS utils is for Red Hat or CentOS, here we have something called common, NFS common. Is it a client software of NFS? This I have installed in one of the node. This I have installed in one of the node. Similarly, I will install in another node. Similarly, I will install this in another node also. Guys, it's a one-time activity. It's a one-time activity. Once you are done, can I use NFS volumes with any number of pods and multiple times? Yes. Now, let me do this as a one-time activity. I'm installing this client. You can do this using Ansible. That is configuration management tool. If you want to do that, if required, can I configure Kubernetes also? Can I install? Can I set up Kubernetes also using Ansible, writing these tasks as these installation instructions as a tasks in my playbook? Can I do that also? Yes. Now I have installed here also. Now let me do it in the master, because sometimes if I tolerate the taints on the master, if pods get scheduled in the master also, if that pod is trying to use NFS value, do I need to have that client software in the master also? So I'm installing that in the master also. In all the nodes I have installed that client software. That client software I have installed in all the nodes, and in the security group, of NFS server, I have opened 2049 port. In the 2049 port I have opened for that range. In my NFS server I have given star in that exports file. I have done everything proper. Now if I use this, if I use like this, am I good to use NFS value with the database pod, that stateful application? NFS. So let me modify that. So here I'll say instead of host path, can I say NFS? It has two details. One is server, another one is path. Server is basically IP address of your server. Which server? Your NFS server. I'm taking private IP. This path, whatever path I have configured as NFS share, this one. Now this can be anything. Whatever volume name you have here, that should be your volume mount name. That can be anything. Something like this also fine. But is this correct? You have a volume with this name, but you don't have a with this name. It will throw error. So let me give correct name, something like this. Now is my pod is going to use NFS value? Is that pod container is going to write the data to the NFS storage instead of host path storage? But as I already told, it's a replica set. If I apply that, is your pods is going to be recreated with that NFS values? No. What I do? I'll delete that RS, then I will apply. Before applying, let me show you in my NFS server. Do I have anything in that folder as of now? In the NFS share directory in my NFS server, do I have any files as of now? No. Now I am going to use NFS values. With my pod now. Now, is my pod C scheduled in my Kubernetes node? Some node. In which node it is scheduled? Let's see. Is it scheduled in 206? But this time, is it using host path value? Let me describe that pod as per my pod specification. Is it using host path value, or what type of value it is? NFS. A NFS mount that has lost the lifetime of a pod. So this is the server IP, this is the NFS share. That volume is used here as a mount. Now, can I see some initial files already written here? Can I see some initial files already written here in this NFS? Kind of a empty data now. Again, it is kind of a empty only. I don't see any data. But whatever records are getting inserted into your database is running in one node, but is the database is writing the data outside of that node in a different storage? Process is running in your Kubernetes, but is that process is writing the data, maintaining the data in an external storage like NFS? Now, even though that system itself is gone, even though that system host itself is gone, still I have a data available in NFS. If another pod, if the pod is rescheduled to a different node also, if pod is rescheduled to a different node, if I am using same NFS value, will I able to see all this data again, even though pod is shifted to other node, completely new node in the cluster? Yes. So this is how NFS value works. So we can use different types of values, but there is a different way of using values called persistent value and persistent value claims. There is a different way of using same thing, whether you are using NFS value, whether you are using EBS value, whether you are using host path value. There is a different way of using values in Kubernetes called persistent value claims and persistent values. This I will explain tomorrow. What is persistent value claim? What is persistent value? All these things I will cover tomorrow. Is everyone clear? Whatever has been discussed today, how important values are when you are running a stateful applications in Kubernetes. I want you to do this as an assignment, the host path value as well as NFS value. I want you to do it as an assignment. I'll continue this persistent value claims, persistent values, and other value related topics in the next class tomorrow. Thank you guys. That's it for today. Try to practice as much as possible. Go through the recordings as much as possible so that it will be easy for you. I keep say you need to put effort from your side. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you only. Even though I am trying to cover more than whatever I wanted to cover, we are trying to deliver more than 100%. If you don't put effort from your side, I can't help. So my efforts will be wasted, and at the same time your money also wasted. If you are not utilizing this course to the extent what we are trying to deliver, your money also wasted. You paid some fee, but you are not utilizing this course to full extent. Like most of the guys are not at all joining. They are not at all practicing, they are not at all doing. It is like my efforts also wasted and their money also wasted. So as a well-wisher from day one, I am saying try to make sure you are attending all the classes, do lot of assignments, do lot of practice, and I am here to help you when the training is going on. You cannot get hold of me. You cannot get hold of me once the training is done, because I might be busy with other batches, other trainings, my work. I may not dedicatedly available the way I am dedicatedly available now. So make sure you are utilizing this opportunity, training more efficiently. Otherwise, my efforts also will be wasted. Thank you guys. I'll continue tomorrow with this concept. See you again tomorrow. And I wish you happy Ramjan. If anyone is there in the class, thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.